So this is 09:34 hours GMT, which is also the local UK time on Saturday, the 23rd of January 2021. It's the week in terms of the date, 22nd of January, when the rally in the Brady Center was held. 22nd of January was a Sunday, 2006. The Brady Center is in Hanbury Street, off Brick Lane, London East 1. And we discussed a lot about that rally. And in yesterday's edition of the Diagnosis of Fleet Street, world exclusive Diagnosis of Fleet Street. Now, this one where on the corner, right hand corner, top right, is a montage, the picture of me taken from behind as I spoke at the rally on the 22nd of January 2006. And as I said, that speech was short, very short compared to the contents that could have been included in my speech. But that was the definitive speech, and that gave the summary, update of our campaign against the Crossrail hole and the Crossrail hole plot inviting clique in control of Tower Hamlets, the local council at the time. And that speech was heard in silence, total silence, and it was approved. And it was the de facto mandate from that rally for the Khoodeelaar campaign and its actual specific actions against the council and against the UK Central Government Department for Transport and the UK Parliament, as represented by the two corrupted committees, one in the name of the House of Commons, the Crossrail Bill Select Committee, which had been formed to give the kind of appearance of parliamentary passage or parliamentary procedure. And it was followed by the similar Crossrail Bill body committee that was set up in the name of the UK House of Peers. Ordinarily, they call it the House of Lords, but we don't accept that any body or individual, human being, can be called Lord. And so therefore the Peers is the House of Peers. PEERS is what we call it. Now that was January 22nd, 2006. 2 years later, in March 2008, we were in hectic communications with the bureaucracy of the House of Peers Crossrail Bill Select Committee. And there was a woman called Chris Price, who was in post as the clerk to that committee. Chris Price turned out to be a racist liar, and she lied, and she deflated and diverted attention from the various issues that we raised. And it was to her email address, Chris Price email address at that time in the House of Peers, or in the House of Parliament, that we sent most of our communications, arguments, evidence against the corrupt project and the corrupt bill. And Chris Price literally shrieked and screamed over the phone. She didn't repeat the same behavior in writing in the emails, but she screamed. Now that is the kind of nervous and lunatic behavior that we come across from racist liars from time to time, especially when racist liars are left with no ability based on evidence to deal with whatever challenges are contained in our challenging comments and communications and questions. Unlike the House of Commons, the House of Lords doesn't have, Lords that is the peers, House of Peers doesn't have a rigorous display of bureaucracy. So therefore we spent a great deal of time complaining about the behavior of this racist Chris Price and sent communications to the particular incumbent as Speaker of the House and also the Speaker of the House of Peers. And there was no outcome that matched the obligation of the House of Peers or the House of Commons to deal with the complaints, apologize to us, and answer the outstanding questions. Now, those questions and claims and arguments that we sent in 2008 remain unanswered to this day, which in calendar terms is 13 years now. And that shows the bankruptcy, the emptiness, the bankruptcy, the unfitness of the UK House of Parliament. Because the same behavior was encountered in terms of the failure to deal with the questions and challenges and arguments and the evidence that we put against the Crossrail whole plot to them when the Crossrail Bill Committee was in session. The Crossrail Bill Committee was in session formally as a bureaucratic undertaken task before the committee was deemed to have expired, as the equivalent committee in the House of Peers was being put together. And that is where we were invited as the campaign, as one of the campaigns in their term, but as the campaign that was defending the community in the East End of London against the Crossrail whole plot. And it was therefore not something we sought, that is, any contract that was established was initiated by them, the House of Peers Select Committee, inviting us to submit our opposition. So we didn't seek to contact them. They made an invitation to us and to others that were in principle opposing the Crossrail whole plot. But we are and have been and were the main campaign. So therefore, we had evidentially, constitutionally, and factually, legitimately, a very substantial claim to be given the opportunity to make the representations. And when we began the representation, that is where the criminals and liars and racists, typified by Chris Price, became hostile and dropped the veneers and the pretense of being courteous, etc., which they had done in the initial invitations sent to us by email. And so when we send the arguments and evidence, Chris Price and the other racists and the liars who were in place to formally push the Crossrail whole plot through the pretense of doing the scrutiny by the select committee. They decided that as they couldn't answer the questions, they couldn't deal with the challenges based entirely on evidence, that we had continued to make right from the beginning and up to that time. Their way out was to create a confrontation with us, which is exactly what Chris Price, screaming on the phone, was doing. Racist women in Britain behave like that. And they have been doing that for as long as I can tell. And the racist women, like Chris Price, include a woman who was involved in the trade union congress called Sarah Veale. Sarah, Veale. That racist name is unforgettable because of the unforgettably racist, stupid, idiotic, corrupt, and pathetic behavior she displayed. She was also a member of the Labour Party, coincidentally, while I was a member of the Labour Party. And at a meeting of the Greater London Labour Party at the time, I met her at the meeting as a fellow committee member or fellow delegate to the Greater London Labour Party at the time. So as is most ordinary, if you meet somebody that you have met at a meeting and if you meet them in the street while traveling or journeying or walking, or you say hello, which is exactly what I did. A while later, while I was transferring from one route in the London Underground system to another, and I saw her among the people that I recognized, and I say hello. And this is for the record, this is exclusive, world exclusive evidence of racist behavior. And she replied, I think a while later, because she went her way and I went my way after saying hello. So she either sent me a note or a communication saying that I was making a pass at her. Can you believe that? And this is exactly the type of accusation that these racists have made, not just in London, not just to me, but other people of African and Asian origin. A notorious case happened in the 1980s in Glasgow or Edinburgh, where this then so-called race relations body had an Asian man and a white woman involved in a dispute. When the Asian man was campaigning against racism by the white woman, she turned around and made a complaint against him that he was sexually approaching her, which wasn't the case. It could have been. Where it is, we acknowledge that, as we have been doing exclusively, originally, and very emphatically condemning the behavior of the English-born Pakistan origin man in the northern English countries and boroughs, where gangs of English-born or England-born Pakistani origin men had been raping, sexually exploiting and grooming mainly white girls. And we denounce that, and we absolutely oppose that and that kind of behavior. But in the case of Sarah Beale, who said my saying hello to her while passing through the underground system constituted my making a sexually motivated pass at her. I mean, I could only, most reluctantly but appropriately, refer to Winston Churchill, who said to a lying woman that she wasn't, absolutely not somebody that was worth that kind of attention. And Sarah Beale, amongst the other racist women, are in that category. In any case, I never needed to make a pass, and I don't need to make a pass. That's not the experience, that's not the reality. But the fact that these women, these racist liars, look for any excuse in order to deflect, undermine the power and the strength of the argument against racism and corruption that I make, illustrates the point perfectly. It vindicates me and vindicates the campaign I'm doing. And extrapolated on the other possible experiences of people in similar situations, it does the same to those people doing the campaigns against racist morons and idiots. Now, going back to the campaign against Crossrail Bill, there was a woman in the either press association or one of the Fleet Street based or Fleet Street linked mainstream outlets, and her name was Abrams. And it was a follow-up call that I made on the telephone after a contact with her about the campaign against Crossrail, in order to check the facts or confirm the facts and the evidence, the veracity of particular statements. She then replied that I had made a sexually intended approach to her by asking the question. Or she said that I had sent either a fax or an email to her address at a time that was harassing her. Now, technically, a fax or an email received at an address is not physically kind of noticed at the time unless somebody looks at the actual process. And it couldn't be sexually intended or motivated because it was, the content was about Crossrail and against Crossrail. And another one, who was the one that actually reported on the package that was shown on the BBC's Politics show on the 26th of March 2000 2006. When I complained to her that she had, in her conversations with me, made statements about the campaign, about Crossrail, and about the various issues, and I said that they were wrong, they were factually wrong, she then turned around and got one of the other BBC persons to say that I was harassing her. And I said is, as parts of the exclusive, world exclusive diagnosis of the British media and the British racism, and the racism at the mainstream and the mainstream BBC and Fleet Street operations. Another one, Marina Salandi Brown. That was before the Crossrail campaign, but this was in the 1980s. Marina Salandi Brown was based inside the BBC, and I had contacted her as part of the campaign, whatever the campaign against the racism in the media. And whatever she said, I had to disagree factually and send my disagreements on to her. And some other things that I factually called her asserting an untruth. And I wanted her to give the evidence. She then had a so-called manager or supervisor inside the BBC send me a communication claiming that I was harassing her. I did no such thing. And I did not need to harass her at all or communicate to her in the way that particular communication insinuated. And there is no evidence, there is no content, there is no substance whatsoever that I would have done that or I would have needed to do that. So that is a number of representative examples that I can include in this particular update of what happened in the campaign against Crossrail Hole and in the context of the House of Peers Select Committee on Crossrail and its bureaucratic person at the time in post called Chris Price. And I put this on the record to her and anyone involved with her at the time or even now to deny what I'm saying about her, and likewise Sarah Beale and to this woman Abrams. And to the BBC woman Zia Trent, who did the package on the Crossrail as aired in the BBC Politics show on 26th of March 2006. I challenge all these liars and racists and idiots and criminals to deny what I'm saying. This is the measure of the extent to which we have to go in order to tell the truth, assert the truth, defend the truth, and continue to campaign to uphold the rights and the values. In a totally racistly organized kind of parliament, media, and so on in Britain. So today's Fleet Street liars are of course the Financial Times on Saturday it costs, I think, more than a pound more. So it's a £4 it costs, the Financial Times, on Saturday. Now the how to spend it supplement hasn't dropped out of the package. So we shall check whether they published one today or not. And they've got an admission here by Johnson. And they're not calling him PM in the Financial Times. They're calling him Johnson. And it is mostly about the admission by Johnson that the COVID-19 surge, the latest surge, may be 30% more deadly. That's an admission that they have not been heading up to. So this is the admission they're making today. And in the rest of the main page, front page of the Financial Times, they've got a note about London Exodus. They're calling it London Exodus. And they're talking about where next for house prices. And they're talking more about it in the House and Home supplement. Is it House and Home or Houses and Home? It's House and Home. So they're talking about housing as a market, which is ideologically and democratically and in accordance with all the various declarations, founding declarations of the United Nations and other international bodies that the UK really strangely in the so-called post-Brexit kind of scenario, it remains signed up to. All these declarations, especially the Treaty of Rome of 1951 or 1950. We shall check the actual year in due course. And if there is an accuracy in my statement about the year, then we shall amend it, update it. Now, the Treaty of Rome, whatever the year, 1950 or 51, was the one that actually carried forward up to the European lands the founding aims of the United Nations and the European Convention on or for Human Rights. That convention was established, and various slightly differing, textually differing versions of the same declaration was ratified, passed and ratified by all the member states of the United Nations and the signatories to the Treaty of Rome. And the Treaty of Rome is the one that created the framework, the constitutional legal framework about human rights. And one of the basic rights is the right to home. So it's a clear, unambiguous departure. It's a clear, unambiguous, undeniable departure, an overdue departure, let's say, by the signatory states from the norms of corrupt capitalist marketing of housing. And it was a departure in line with the kind of other departures that have been witnessed in the last 75 years, let's say. in the legislative framework of signatory states like the United Kingdom. Whatever the irregularities, the fragilities, and the weaknesses and local little contradictions within the framework, essentially the general thrust, the main thrust of the framework has been one of positive movement towards recognizing the concept of human rights in strategic and key areas like housing. And it shows that even though those very signatory states like the United Kingdom practice capitalism that depends on the creation of a market on housing, they were quite willing to sign up to the departure. Thus, in effect, de jure and de facto, they were admitting the weakness of the market and the unfitness of the market to provide the housing fit for human beings. So that was not only a departure from the current existing capitalist kind of norms and priorities and kind of arguments for retaining the market status. It was in fact a contradictory situation where the market status was shown to have been unfit for human beings in the country, in the jurisdiction of this country. And we shall be talking about the housing human rights more in this part. And we shall be talking about the aftermath and the follow-up stories to the swearing in of Joe Biden as president and the installation of what they are saying, the first woman, first South Asian woman, the first black woman as the president of the USA. As we said yesterday, again on the same question of Biden being sworn in, there was a piece by a black man writing with the Financial Times kind of email address contact, so thus suggesting that he is either a full-time staff member of the Financial Times or a regular contributor who has been treated as an equal to the staff members. They say that, so in that piece yesterday in the Financial Times, Isan Swain or Swan said that Barack Obama did not make any significant difference in racial policies. And I diagnosed his refusal of kind of failure to use the term racist or the term anti-racist, etc. And I termed him as a stooge, as I termed Obama again as a stooge. Now, what they're doing with Kamala Harris, I think, comes from a mixture of backgrounds. Her father or her paternal side, person of her kind of paternal ancestors who settled in Jamaica, came from a part of India today, which includes Bihar and Jharkhand, I think that part. To those who are completely mentally enslaved and stupid, the subcontinent, which nearly has almost 2 billion people, Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh, those people who are brainwashed into idiocy in the Caribbean islands. Nearly 2 billion people are really coolies, Coolies. Coolies are not at all demographically any significant part of the population. It's a very small number of the poorest people that have been found to be used by the British as manual laborers. And for such a stupid distortion of the entire subcontinent's population to take place and take hold in the brains of these idiots completely proves their stupidity and mental slavery beyond any explanation at all. In the subcontinent, the whole of these countries, there have been people in exactly the same position as kings that are found in the English and the Western European history and the Eastern European history. Kings and royalties and other people. And people of very large numbers of people of socially recognized and otherwise socially and economically recognized status and wealth. There have been hundreds of millions of people, wealthy people, as well as hundreds of millions of people who are in poverty. But coolies do not constitute any mentionable number in the demography, in the social classification. Coolies is a very, 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 very small number of people that have been found to be so-called during the period of 190 years of the British, mainly in transport locations and carriers of luggage and goods. People coming from the subcontinent to the UK and to the USA, hardly there is any coolie. And if there are coolies in the sense that people of economic kind of status, economic status defined by the lack of income, then there could be a few people, but they are not in any shape or form noticeable in the main flow of migrants coming from the subcontinent. Another logistical factor explaining that is that to travel, which is what happened, travel from the subcontinent to the UK, Western Europe, before the period of asylum and all these current mode of migration, people had to have access to significant amounts of money to pay for the journey. Anyone who would be unfortunate to be still working as laborers in the mode of being capable of being called a coolie, most of those people would have no access to the kind of money needed to travel. So this is part of our diagnosis of Black Lives Matter, where the stupidity, idiocy, and corruption and the evil attitude fostered among quite a lot of African origin people against Asian people is to be found, and we need to eradicate that sickness. Having said that, there is, on the other side, hostility and contempt and hatred and denial by so many people from the subcontinent towards and against the people of the African origin, including those coming from the Caribbean. while I was active on the now defunct Inner London Education Authority and was organizing a new platform at the time, the Black Parents Association. Simultaneously, as I was also organizing a rigorous formation of the parents and governors involved in schools under the banner of the London Collective of Black Governors. All of this was happening in the 1980s. In the course of that series, a number of activities, a mix of activities, I came across a woman called Rupi Singh. Rupi Singh lived in Carshalton in South London, and she was a teacher in a London school. And during a break or a meeting at a location, either the Royal Festival Hall or one of the other halls near the county hall that I needed to use from time to time for meetings, conversations, or in the county hall, it could be one of those tea or cafes or cafeterias. Rupi Singh was recalling her parents and her own background in a country in South or Southern Africa. And I think intending innocently to express her solidarity or record of solidarity with people of African origin. Rupi Singh was, of course, of Indian origin, and she was of Punjabi origin as far as I can establish. As part of that, she said, and they had if I remember correctly from the 1980s, she said that she had, or her family, owned a shop in that country where they were living at the time. And Rupi Singh said that as part of the outlook of compassion and solidarity with the poorer sections of the people in their area in Africa, they would either not charge some of these people who frequented the shop or would charge them less than what they would otherwise charge the customer for the same item or items. Now, that was not recalled. She didn't recall it with any intention to mislead or patronize or anything. In her way, she was just affirming or reaffirming that she and her family were being positive and kind and supportive. Taking the whole history of the treatment of people of African origin by Asian people, I immediately responded to Rupi Singh's recollection by saying that she was wrong to think that that kind of behavior amounted to her or her family's kind of being completely unprejudiced towards the African people. They may have been kind and helpful to some of the people, but that behavior did not remove the possibility or the basis for her and her families being called anti-African or kind of patronizing or disrespectful or looking down on the African people. That is what I said. Of course, it's not a verbatim recollection. I'm recalling in paraphrase the main episode, that conversation at that time in the 1980s in Southeast 1. Now, I have done that and I do that all the time. One of the things that I have done has been to assert solely on evidence the duty on the parts of both the people from the African backgrounds and the people from the Asian backgrounds to stand away from their differences in that definition and to look at the impact of racism and the origin of racism, the source or sources of racism, which is colonialism, imperialism. And that remains the work absolutely undergoing continuous action, as far as I'm concerned. And I don't see the recognition of that in anything that I have seen or heard about or from the Black Lives Matter. There are other detailed evidence where a particular, let's say, section of criminals from African Caribbean backgrounds has been actively hostile to people from the African Asian backgrounds in this country. And I have come across literally hundreds of incidents, because I am from non-African origin, Asian background. So therefore, I have been targeted for that reason, not because of me doing anything wrong, but because of my identity in terms of the background. And the fact that I have been speaks volumes about the failures to mobilize against racism, which affects and destroys and does damage to lives of African people, African origin people coming through to UK either through the Caribbean or directly. And the same to the people of the subcontinent. I say the subcontinent and I don't say the Far East, because there are differences between and among people in Asia. And what we are talking about in this context, when we say people of Asian background, mainly we talk about the people of the subcontinent. Because there is not the same kind of comparable cohesion among people of the subcontinent with the people of the Far East. The subcontinent, let's say, is covered by the expression South Asia. And Southeast Asia refers to the other parts, starting from Burma to Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, Korea, both Koreas, the Chinese, and most of Malaysia and Indonesia. And there are religious factors as well. And so when we said African and Asian origin, we of course refer to Asians in the context of the subcontinent. And another thing, the demography. Taking together the numbers of people living on the planet today, the numbers of people that are actually in the category of Asian is the highest. And even the people of the subcontinent, in terms of numbers, constitute and count as more than the European people and other continents put together. Not all the other continents, but some other continents put together. Going back to the stupidity of referring to the people of the subcontinent as coolies, let's say that there are about 100 million people in the subcontinent who are directly descended from what used to be the highest castes. 100 million people, direct descendants of the highest castes. Of course, caste is a controversial thing, but it is not. It is not coolies, that's for sure. So how did the people from Caribbean or with the Caribbean background come to the conclusion that most of the Asian people or people from the subcontinent are coolies? It is even worse than being stupid. And that stupidity has been pointed out to them many times, and they've refused to give up the stupidity and come out of this stupidity. So there is a big issue there. Now, as I said, on the numbers of areas where the Asian people or people from the subcontinent are contemptuous and hostile to, and denial of the right, and in denial of the rights of the people of the African and Caribbean backgrounds. The numbers are huge, and they have to be tackled. They have to be first recognized and then tackled. Tackled meaning removed, eradicated, not tackled like being coped with and managed and excuses found for. They should be opposed. So moral, ethical imperative. So we shall be going on to discuss this more in due course. This is the I newspaper dated Saturday and Sunday. Saturday and Sunday, 23 and 24 January 2021. And so its price is £1.20. So double edition. Today's newspapers that we have directly paid for today is just over £20. UK prices, £20, 2021 prices. And Joe Biden is shown in a cartoon in the I newspaper, looking for the bleach. And he is told, I think I cannot say it as effectively as the cartoon itself, so let's show. That's the cartoon. And that's Joe Biden. So the cartoon says, well, cartoon makes Joe Biden ask, good God, where did Donald keep the bleach? And his advisor, of course, says, in the fridge, Mr. President. It's literally literally deadly situation. It's as deadly now as it was when we anticipated it would be deadly. In late 2015, when Trump announced his Dracula career. And there is an admission also in the headline in the I newspaper, headline to the piece by Patrick Cockburn. Now, Patrick Cockburn is the son of the Cobburns. The Cobburns in the 1930s attempted to publish a then original investigative newspaper called The Week. Patricia Cockburn and her husband were the rare couple in Britain. And it was a completely non-Fleet Street type paper. Of course, the Cobburns, spelled Cockburn, Cockburn, but it's an Irish, so its pronunciation is Cockburn. And the Cobburns in the 1930s were the only couple that attempted to undo the damage being done to the cause of journalism by Fleet Street of that time. And so therefore, the Cockburn children are kind of carriers of a sort of significant legacy that is not quite as corrupt as the rest of Fleet Street. So this Patrick Cockburn is one of the brothers that has been given space by current Fleet Street papers. And compared to the average Fleet Street writer, the Cobburns have come across with less poisonous denial than their contemporaries. I'm not saying by any means that these Cockburn sons are uniquely honest and truthful in comparison with the rest of the Fleet Street journals. I'm not saying that at all, but they have less contamination than their contemporaries about their pieces. So this headline is significant because of its kind of relationship in terms of the analysis that we are presenting. Because I have said before that Trump was not the first criminal in office in White House, and Trump was not the only courier of hateful messages in the USA. So this is the headline that actually echoes that. It's obviously not necessarily something that Patrick Cockburn has written by viewing what I have been saying or reading what I've been saying, but this is a rare kind of similarity. The headline says the uncivil war has been around longer than Trump, which is absolutely correct. And the phrase uncivil war is the phrase used by Biden in his inaugural speech. So here, let's read the first, or maybe probably the two paragraphs. Patrick Cockburn writes, I was always worried when I had to enter the green zone in Baghdad at a time when its entrances were under frequent attack by suicide bombers driving vehicles filled with explosives. That's the first paragraph by Patrick Cockburn in the I newspaper, page 26. Then the next paragraph he says, being blown up by Al-Qaeda in Iraq was not the only danger. Can you believe it? I mean, being blown up is normally worth considering as a definitive, conclusive closure to a life. But he's saying there is more, or there is more danger, even worse. The next sentence he says, the soldiers guarding the outer checkpoints of the zone were understandably nervous and would shoot at any vehicle that they thought was coming too close to them. Once I had to cower down behind a concrete barrier as they fired at a battered old car which had stalled just in front of their position. I mean, madness doesn't begin to sum up the situation created by Tony Blair and George W. Bush and others. I recalled the old Baghdad Green Zone this week as 25,000 US National Guards established a well-defended area in the center of Washington, District of Columbia. Now, the lunacy of Baghdad under the American occupation has been contextually, accurately exposed as being nothing as compared to the lunacy created by Donald Trump-fronted presidency of the USA in the swamp. He became the swamp. Whereas in his initial spiels, the lying Trump had repeatedly used the phrase swamp, and he said that he would end the swamp. But as we pointed out at the time, and as events proved, Donald Trump was the swamp. And Patrick Coburn goes on in the fourth paragraph, the purpose was to protect the inauguration of Joe Biden as president and US security agencies caught on the hop by the invasion of the Capitol on 6th of January were busy slamming the stable door long after the immediate crisis was over. The Democrats and the largely Trump-hating media want to portray the all-right rioters as domestic terrorists who had staged an abortive insurrection in order to stop Biden from taking office. Clearly, some members of the mob would have liked to do just that, but despite the impression given by all these blood-curdling video films, this was not a coup in the sense of an organized attempt to seize power. Any suggestion that the US Capitol faced a threat anything like that to the Green Zone in Baghdad 15 years ago is an absurd exaggeration. I have not said that that is the case. I have said that the loons have come home to roost in the USA. What we are seeing is political theater, which is scarcely surprising, since we have seen little else during the Donald Trump 4 years in the White House. It is fitting that the end of the Trump presidency was marked by two events: the Capitol invasion and the exaggerated military response to it, that hover between theater and reality, etc., etc. So what he is saying is that the Baghdad under American occupation and the Capitol siege were not similar. And I'm saying that is not true. What happened in the Capitol seizure didn't have to be a coup, organized attempt to take over power or seize power. But the ability of the swampers Trumpers to do what they did shows the total fragility and absurdity of most of the claims about the due process and constitutionality and all the rest of it in the USA. Anyway, so what he's saying, this Patrick Coburn, and Patrick Coburn is being just like the black guy from the Bermudan American background, saying he's just holding back. He's not actually telling the truth because he will lose the column. He will lose the job. This is what I have not done. My whole career as a writer has been entirely based on what I want to write, not what I am told to write. And what I want to write becomes absolutely paramount because nobody else is prepared to tell the truth. So I have to be the one to tell the truth, which is what I do. When I wrote for 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever number of publications in the then United Pakistan, that is Bangladesh and what is now Pakistan, I did that without any remuneration, expressly asserted by me that I don't want to write in return for any money. And my writing was more prominent than most of the people at the time. So I wrote what I saw was the evidence, the facts. And I've been doing that all the time. And Patrick Coburn now completely contradicts the image of his parents that I set out in the beginning of this piece. He said the social, economic, and cultural causes of the rise of Trump are still there, which is absolutely correct. Then he goes on in the next sentence, America has always been more deeply divided by race and class than most Americans and almost all foreigners realized. The repeated, rather desperate appeals for unity at Biden's inauguration serve only to emphasize the divisions. Of course they do. Logically they do. Factually they do. Because the moment you need unity, you call for unity, shows that there is disunity. That's the beginning. Biden spoke of ending the uncivil war. But this has been beneath the surface of American life since independence and will not end now. That is exactly the case. But he, Patrick Coburn, along with his brother, they have been refusing to tell the truth, anything like the truth of that in those 5 years or 4 years, whatever, however long they want to associate Trump with the regime in the USA, the official regime that is. Claude Coburn, the name of Patrick Coburn's father, and Patricia Coburn, I think I have always had high regard for them based on the evidence of what they did, evidences I have read. I was not around in the 1940s when they were 1930s when they were doing the thing. But the legacy has not been really continued in any shape or form. The fact that these two are genetically their children carries some continuation, but that's not anywhere near the determination of Claude Coburn or Patricia Coburn. The two of them actually formed a formidable team for a good number of years, and they made a mark. And that kind of determination, not necessarily everything they wrote or everything they disclosed, because Claude Coburn was an agent of the intelligence agencies, intelligence operations. and Patricia Cockburn was not far removed. In other words, they were both very much at home with the state secret services in the UK. And it is possible that they were familiar with a number of foreign or other countries, intelligence and spying operatives from other countries. I have no objection to that connection if they didn't abuse the connection and they didn't abuse the information and the access to mislead people and mislead society, mislead the world, and put on misleading, untruthful, untrue contents in their publication, The Week. I have been reading and studying the work of the Cockburns, as well as I have been reading and studying the work of most of the 20th century kind of investigative, intellectual contributors and active campaigners, as well as reading about the role of the likes of George Orwell, Eric Blair, that is, and others in the Western context and the counterparts in the USA, and also have been paying attention to the likes of Alexander Solzhenitsyn in the battle against the Soviet dictatorship, Stalinist dictatorship, and people who are from the other kind of spectrum, like Niraj Chaudhuri, the Indian, the guy who was born in what is now Bangladesh, but became an Indian and became an exiled person resident in the UK, much appreciated by his kind of approvers and patrons in the imperial kind of clubs and societies in England, because Niraj Chaudhuri was a Bengali from Mymensingh, which is in Bangladesh, but he was very much a loyal, mentally willing servant of empire and imperialists, and he denounced the Bengalis, the other Indians who opposed the British Empire. He was a mental slave dedicated to the empire. And to him, Niraj Chaudhuri, that is, it is a fact. It's not a fact, but he said it is a fact that the liberation, the liberal kind of mentality across the subcontinent, this was actually a result of the work introduced by the imperialists. Niraj Chaudhuri could not be more wrong, but that's what his position is. But I have had to read most of his stuff, including, especially starting with his autobiography of an unknown Indian, which is what he called it. And I read it in Calcutta. And I read that as one of the first books that I bought on the streets, pavements in Calcutta. Now, anyone who doesn't know Calcutta should be told this. In my opinion, Calcutta has got the highest number, the richest display of bookstalls in a city. And I would spend most of my day going through the bookshops. And I bought about at least 100 books from the pavements. They were all freshly published, all published, written and published in India, English language books, because I don't read Hindi. So those books were, and there was nothing in Bengali, so therefore I bought the books, all of them in English, and they were all written and published at the time. So I bought about 100 plus books. Why am I talking about those ones? Because all of them, absolutely all of them, were about Bangladesh. What is more, all of them promoted the narrative, the agenda, the theme, the claim that it was India that liberated Bangladesh from Pakistan. So many people in India were very active in producing books claiming that India created Bangladesh. It wasn't an allegation made by others. It was an assertion made by Indians that they liberated Bangladesh, they created Bangladesh. That was 1972, 49 years ago. So, what we are looking at in terms of the contents of Fleet Street is, of course, stuffed with lies. And it is our task to diagnose the lies, and it is the eternal battle. Here is the Daily Star on Saturday, which says, this is a headline that the Star has been following this sort of satirical, semi-comical kind of imagery and images on front page. And this one is about the headline. The main headline is apparently the news item. High street shops set to torch stock in Brexit kerfuffle. Now, what that is about high street shops are planning on setting fire to some of their staff after a Brexit internal red tape row. We have to get into the full details so that we don't misinterpret. Retailers are considering torching stock as European customers keep sending it back due to Brexit red tape. Many customers on the continent are rejecting British products when they discover unexpected customs charges. But British businesses then face more paperwork to bring them back. UK Fashion and Textile Association Chief Adam Mansell said, it is cheaper to write off the cost of goods than dealing with it all, abandoning or potentially burning them. He said the Brexit trade deal saw EU buyers as importers. He added, you have a courier knocking on the door, giving you a customs clearance invoice that you need to pay to receive your goods. Mr. Ansel said UK retailers then face an export clearance charge, import charge arrival, import VAT charge, and depending on the goods, a rules of origin document. He added, large businesses don't have a handle on it, never mind smaller ones. A government spokesman said companies were encouraged to appoint a specialist. Now, whatever the actual details, this is the opposite of taking back control. This is the exact scenario of being taken over, denied any control, denuded of all control. Now, exactly that is Brexit. It's not red tape. It did not come from anywhere else, somewhere else. It was Brexit. And of course, the items are to be treated by customers in the continent or in the continental countries as imports. because that's what they are. So, the unfitness of Boris Johnson is exposed again. How did Johnson and Gove and others, well, nasty Nigel Farage, but he's not part of the Conservative government. Farage and Aaron Banks and other criminals who promoted Brexit, they said that Brexit would mean Britain, in its economic behavior, would be free to take back control. Now, why do they want to sell any British goods to any customers in the continent? Surely they can sell goods to Australia, 12,000 miles away, which will take a few years to reach there. Australia, New Zealand, Canada, South Africa, all these ports that the imperial white British Empire was kind of based in, were listed in the propaganda by Boris Johnson and Michael Gove as constituting the global British market, global British economic independence after Brexit. So why isn't Keir Starmer telling the morons that that is exactly what they asked for? It's not red tape that has emerged as a result of some conspiracy unconnected with the Brexit morons' behavior and the deal. It is exactly what they wanted. So Keir Starmer is being third-rate leader of the opposition again by staying silent about this. It's not red tape. And Beaverbrook's poisonous legacy, the Daily Suppress, continues desperately to find a positive factor, element, aspect to shore up the image of the sinking Brexit frontal Boris Johnson. It says with an underline under the can, we can beat deadly new strain. And here they're absolutely brazenly contradicting what Boris Johnson has been quoted as admitting in the other papers. In the other papers today, let's look again at the Financial Times. The Financial Times saying Johnson is warning variant in COVID surge may be 30% more deadly. Now that is very clearly not saying what the lying express is saying. The lying express is saying that Johnson is saying vaccines work on dangerous UK variant. That is exact opposite to what the Financial Times is reporting Boris Johnson is saying. It's saying that Boris Johnson is saying, warning, that the new variant is 30% more deadly. And the lying express is saying in that subheading that Johnson is saying that vaccines work on dangerous UK variant. It's brazenly lying, the Daily Express, about the same, allegedly, the same person, the Boris Johnson. And even in the Daily Boris Graph, The name Boris Graf we have given to denote the paper that tells lies, not Boris Graf as affirming some kind of positive, intellectually superior, reliable, dependable kind of Boris Johnson. It is the opposite. That Boris Johnson is a liar, Boris Johnson is a crook, and the crooked liar Boris Johnson is given promotions and propaganda aid by the Daily Boris Graf. But here, even the Daily Boris Graf is saying what the Financial Times is saying, the opposite of what the Beaverbrook lying Daily Suppress is saying. The Daily Suppress is saying that Boris Johnson says that UK vaccine work on the new variant. And the Boris Graf is denying that completely. It is saying mutant strain more deadly. It's saying more alarmingly or alarming fact than the Financial Times' headline. Because the Financial Times says 30% more deadly. And the Daily Boris Graf says it's more strain, more deadly. More deadly, it is more than 30% deadly. So, diagnosing Fleet Street exclusively, world exclusively diagnosing Fleet Street, the Khoodeelaar campaign is asserting hereby and herewith that today's Fleet Street newspapers are telling lies or are contradicting each other about the state of the COVID virus affecting British people or people in Britain, and also the state of unfitness of the UK government as fronted by the cabal that is allegedly led by Boris Johnson. And the scum owned by the dirty digger Rupert Murdoch is reporting about a man who is 26 stone in weight and he needs an operation or he will die. How many people that they are reporting are dying or dead in the last counted period is not mentioned in the front page, but that is the story that they're leading with. And the next page contains an item on page 2 with the photograph of Grant Shapps, who is the so-called transport minister, saying that 800 million pounds, UK pounds, at today's prices, that is 23rd of January 2021, 800 million pounds have been signed off. 800 million pounds of government money or money that the government has borrowed and is responsible for. The 800 million, which is just 200 million short of the billion. So 800 million pounds worth of expenditure has been signed off by the current Boris Johnson fronted government for new railway networks. Now that's important in the context of the opposition that we support and we advocate against the high speed 2, HS2 railway corruption that is worth hundreds of billions of pounds of wasted, robbed public money. Now, we have analyzed entirely based on facts and evidence and the data and the statistics based on the use of the railway system by ordinary people, passengers in this country. And we have said from anything from 30 to 40, 30 to 20 to 10 years, any decade or any number of decades of the last, let's say 30 years, use of railway lines has declined. And that has declined regardless of Brexit, because Brexit is only in its second calendar year now. So the decline has happened, or the decline in railway use has been happening over a very long time in this country, and that is to do with ever increasing costs. Tickets passengers have been having to pay. And most ordinary people who have to travel on the rails to go to work don't have the income to match the increasing costs. That is directly the first reason, nothing to do with any concern for environment or anything to do with that. It's to do with the fact that the money isn't available to pay for the tickets. So it's not some secret that new railway networks should not be funded and created in that situation with that trend, unless the economy as experienced by the individual passenger goes in the other direction. That is to say, individual passengers are able to receive significantly higher amounts in their pockets, which is not happening. So HS2 itself should be scrapped, and the money being wasted in rewarding the crooks that control the agendas of the HS2. The crooks have been paid under contracts. So HS2 must be scrapped, and the money completely redistributed on other projects and schemes and needs, including in the NHS, including in the teachers and other people being paid significantly more money than they are currently being paid, so that they can really do a better job in the important fields of health and education, to take two examples. Now, the other point we can make on the basis of the contents on page 2 of the Murdoch scum is that it is possible that the current climate will force the finance minister, who is fraudulently called Chancellor of the Exchequer. To those even in Britain, Chancellor of the Exchequer does not automatically convey anything to do with finance. I mean, to people who are not dedicated students of the language. So this finance minister is being featured in a piece where the main headline is 34 billion pounds added to the debt mountain, that is borrowing of the individuals on the. So let's see whether they're talking about government debt or debt of individual consumers. It says that UK debt mountain has hit an all-time high after 34 billion pounds was borrowed in December. So they're talking about the government borrowing, 34 billion. But 1 billion pound of that has been already wasted by giving grant shops the option to sign checks for the new railway networks. And 100 billion plus has been wasted on the high speed railway nightmare that they are constructing or pretending to construct from London to the Midlands and beyond. And what they're doing is diverting money from essential needs in the society, in the economy, to this corruptly promoted, constructed pretext to enrich big business contractors under the claims, false claims about the country needing a high-speed railway network, which it doesn't. As I said, anything between 30 to 40% of existing railway lines have been closed de facto or mothballed. And also, in the London kind of context, or in the context of London and adjoining areas, Crossrail 2 has been mothballed. And Crossrail 2 has been mothballed after secretly wasting 100 million pounds without disclosing that waste to the public or to Parliament. So the unfitness of Boris Johnson's funded cabal is all over the place, everywhere. And yet, the unfit as opposition leader, Keir Starmer, is silent on all of those. And our campaign is a specialist. Well, we are specialists in many fields, but specialists in the context of high octane, rigorous campaign against government, against wrong projects and allocations of resources by the government. As we have been saying, the work that we needed to do before we forced the government a U-turn on the Crossrail whole plotted against Brick Lane, the work was of such high intellectual standard that was needed to expose the intellectual backwardness and stupidity of the government and their experts and their academics and their lawyers and their engineers. At every stage, we address the inadequacy, the contradictions, the shoddiness, and the stupidities involved in the Crossrail whole. So much so that today is now calendar years, it's now 18 to 19, 20, 21. So it's a calendar. In terms of the calendar years, it is the fourth calendar year after, well, it's the third calendar year after 2018, which is what the year was that they had said work on the Crossrail line would be complete and the Crossrail line would be operational. It isn't. And it is unlikely to be at this stage, at this date, 23rd of January 2021, it is impossible to be confident in saying that the Crossrail line would go operational safely in later parts of this year. And so therefore, what we said throughout the years, to December 2003 until about 2009, when the complete U-turn about the Crossrail plot to dig a hole in Brick Lane, the U-turn was kind of implemented, if you like, or perpetrated. And so in those 6 years, we said that the existing networks, underground and overground networks, railway networks of all descriptions in London and around London, needed the money that the government was prepared to spend for Crossrail. And this is now 17 years, calendar years, since we started in December 2003, started the campaign. And remember, the campaign is not slogans. The campaign is not placards. The campaign is not banners only. The campaign is mainly me writing direct challenges to the government and their engineers and their promoters and the media, so-called. I have written thousands of articles and items and comments and rejoinders and rebuttals. Only a very small number have been actually published by the mainstream media. But I have done the work, that is to say, put the evidence to them, the media and the Crossrail whole plot backers and the MPs who have failed to answer. Remember what I said about failure? When I talked about Marina Salandi Brown and this woman called Abrams and the woman called Zia Trent at the BBC at the time, working as a freelance. And all of these people have failed to factually rebut or reply to my challenges. That has been and is the strength of a campaign. Give the evidence that cannot be denied. And when they can't deny the evidence, they look for some excuses, other diversions in their fantasy to create a diversion that is credible. Diversion from the credible assertions of evidence that we have been making all throughout the years of campaigning. So what happened with the actual expenditure that they made for the Crossrail 2 project, 100 million pounds. They didn't actually publish anything about that. And they only published anything about that in the belated, reluctant, and underhanded admission that Crossrail 2 has been mothballed. Now, the Daily Mail is a right-wing outfit. By right-wing in the context of COVID-19 and the lockdown, we mean that they are in denial essentially in denial of the fact of the virus being as raging and rampant as it is. In other words, they want normality in schools being reopened, normality in factories being reopened, where people in the lowest possible rates of income are forced to do slave labor, and so on. So that the marketeers can resume doing market, that is to say, speculate on rates of profit by exploiting the lowest paid and by allowing the preparation of for more low paid exploited targets by opening the schools. And it is not, this headline is not about education. This headline is not about poverty. This headline is not about starving the children of the poorest families or backgrounds. This headline is in denial of all of those. Because if the Daily Mail wanted to address or oppose poverty, it would have the headline about poverty being the reason, not the lack of computers. Because if the families and the parents and the guardians and the other people responsible for those children in lowest income groups, if they were lacking in access to computers, they would have been able to deal with that lack and bridge that gap and buy the computers and other equipments if they had the income, if they had the money. And there should not be and should never have been having to beg ordinary members of the public for donations to deal with the computer shortage. It should be the priority of the government. And the government can very easily meet all the demands and needs for the tech devices and equipments that the children don't have now by scrapping the HS2 project and redistributing the money to meet the needs of the children and doing similar things in the equipping of the main personnel, actually day-to-day personnel, both inside the NHS and in related parts of the care system, so-called, dealing with the actual delivery of person-to-person care and support and protection. But that's not what the Daily Mail is doing. The Daily Mail is actually denying or reinforcing the lie that the UK government is responsible for delivering the support to the children, to the schools. That's what they're doing. Why else are they saying that ordinary readers of the Daily Mail should be making available those computers to the children that they don't have the computers? And we can go back to the role played by the local council in the East End of London, in Tower Hamlets, by looking at the proceedings on the Sunday, the 22nd of January 2006, when I gave the keynote speech. The keynote speech picture is montaged on the right of the screen, and I am pictured from behind, so I cannot be seen. My face is not visible, but that's the moment that this picture is taken. It's a still photograph was taken, not a video photograph as far as I can access. If there exists one or more, then I have not been able to access it even 17 years later. And the length of time since that, 14 years later. I shall be updating on that when and if necessary. In that speech, I said everything that needed to be said about the role of the clique in Tower Hamlets Council, the local council. And what I highlighted or I focused on and what was actually immediately effective was the fact that the criminals had been paying consultants hundreds of thousands of pounds in order to find an excuse to justify the claim which they were retailing that Crossrail would bring, quote, benefits to the East End of London. Now, by benefits, they didn't specify what exactly they were meaning. And we knew that they could not be meaning any real, tangible benefit that could be exclusively ascribed to the Crossrail project or the Crossrail whole plot. One of the things that the then incumbent in the post of, quote, leader of the council, Tower Hamlets Council, named Abbas Uddin. We now say Abbas Uddin alias Halal. It wasn't necessary to say any alias at the time because in 2006, Abbas Uddin had no alias. Publicly, his name was not a different one. But since then, he has reinvented his name and he calls himself Halal Uddin Abbas. He's not Halal from the original years when he managed to travel up the greasy wall of career in the local council. As we said yesterday, Abbas Uddin alias Halal makes claims that are repeated by the ethnicity-linked outlets operated from Tower Hamlets in the name of the community, Bangladeshi community in Tower Hamlets, mostly following a corrupt, criminal, lying, idiotic, ignorant, subservient, servile, mentally enslaved kind of individuals. They say that Abbas Uddin alias Halal was, quote, leader, quote, of the Labour group of councillors in Tower Hamlets 4 times. And we say that he could be leader 400 times and still not making any significant difference in terms of making a contribution to defend the community from where he begged the votes to get elected councillor in the first place every time. So the benefits that Abbas Uddin alias Halal claimed would be brought to the East End of London by Crossrail were not defined, were not specified, but as a package, Abbas Uddin alias Halal peddled that stupid, lying, untruthful claim. Now, we said that there was no benefit. We said there was not only no benefit, but there will be severe losses, detriment caused to the local community by and via and through the Crossrail line, regardless regardless and in addition to or different from the actual opposition that we were mounting against the Crossrail whole plot against Brick Lane. We said that the Crossrail line would be abused by diverters and others who look for any pretext to first impose on the local community this diversion. And this has happened. Because in the last, let's say 4 years, 5 years, one of the main promoters of the Crossrail big business narrative and agenda, being the owners of the London Evening, and we say no standards standard, have mentioned in their property circulation, property supplement circulated with the printed version of the Evening No Standard, which is created, actually paid for by the property speculators and degenerators, circulated along with the printed Evening No Standard. But because of the lockdown, the physical printed circulated Evening Standard is not necessary to be used, necessarily used for the same purpose of carrying a supplement about the market. Online, we have accessed several references to Crossrail in conjunction with Whitechapel and the Whitechapel area, the Stepney area, in relation to lucrative. The adjective used by the promoters in that context, the words used have been shamelessly positive, like they have said, lucrative. And the purpose behind that choice is to show that a high-speed railway line going through Whitechapel and Stepney and so on would become an asset, as an asset that is attached to the particular property which is the subject of the buying and the selling promotion. Now we say the same thing now as we have been saying since the beginning, that even if the train goes faster, any kind of amount of time faster than the current line or lines, it still does not constitute a benefit unless the promoters propagating that lie can substantiate by translating any speed, any amount of time in terms of speed to a tangible, material benefit. They haven't been able to do that. So I said in my speech on the 22nd of January 2006 that Owen Wally, who was the degeneration kind of director in the Tower Hamlets Corrupt Council at the time, Owen Wally was lying, the councillors were lying, Abbas Uddin Elias Halal was lying. I didn't have to name Abbas Uddin Halal. People could see that he was sitting among the people in the rally, and he was very, very kind of deflated looking. Not just him, all the councillors are looking deflated when I was speaking. And that equation, it was based on the evidence of what I was saying and the evidence of what the lies that the council was telling. So we shall be continuing. This is Saturday, 23rd of January 2020. And the time now is 11:33 hours GMT on Saturday, the 23rd of January 2020. This is part A. Part A of the KhoodeelaarTV campaign, World Exclusive Diagnosis of Fleet Street, coming to an end. Part A here.